Well, after the 12th Corps Commander level talks that has taken place, there's been disengagement at Patrol Point 17A, that's Gogra. And this comes after the disengagement that we saw in Pangong. So, Republic has now got more details of the disengagement process. Our sources within the Indian Army has essentially revealed that a buffer zone has been created and a moratorium has been imposed on patrolling, which is essential for not seeing a repeat of Galwan incident. Now, Army's next focus essentially will be disengagement talks in Hot Springs and Depsang. On your screens right now are the details that we are picking up after speaking to our sources within the Indian Army to try and break this down. And in this edition, we'll also have special guests who understand the nature of this entire disengagement and what does this standoff essentially mean. And also, I'll be joined by my colleague Shivani, who's getting us more details. So let me quickly take through some of the main points, Shivani, and I'll also ask a producer to put Shivani through. And while I put out these details that we are picking up, Shivani can also come in. Shivani, what I'm picking up from my sources is that essentially it's kind of a buffer zone that has been created. That perhaps may not be the terminology per se, but just to try and explain this to our viewers, what does this disengagement essentially entail? I'm told that a sort of a buffer zone that has been created, and when we say buffer zone, it's a moratorium on any kind of patrolling, which both sides feel that it is essentially for not seeing a repeat of Galwan. And as far as the disengagement is concerned, that's only happened at Patrol Point 17A. Structures that have essentially been dismantled over the last few days are observation posts, hutments, water supply to these hutments and shelters. And perhaps as far as the roadmap ahead is concerned, we are being told that PP15 or Hot Spring and Depsang would be perhaps part of the talks that are going to take place at a later stage. Shivani, before I go back to my guest, I want you to put this into perspective of what are the essential details that you're picking up right now.
Shravan, this is a major breakthrough that has come after the 12th round of talks that happened on 31st of July and 4th and 5th of August. These 2 days, disengagement has already happened from the Gogra post. Gogra post was a friction point where both the forces, India and Chinese troops, were quite close to each other, and that's what disengagement means now. They both have pulled back. The strength might, what we are learning from the sources, one platoon strength was there, each from India and China. So both of them have pulled back to a distance from where they are not close enough to each other to get into an eyeball situation like what we've seen earlier in Galwan. And that is what we are talking about, the buffer zone where patrolling will not take place. And the structures which had come up in last few months have also been, they have been dismantled. The ground situation remains to what was there in April 2020. That's what we call status quo. So now both the troops have already pulled back, and this has been a verified, recorded, coordinated, phased disengagement between India and China. This is very important and very crucial. And from here, the next points that will be discussed would be definitely the hot springs that we also know as patrolling point 15. And they are also quite crucial. Depsang plains have also been discussed, and that is a quite old issue that might also take some time, because in Depsang there are more than 3 to 4 sub points that need to be disengaged, that need to be discussed. But as of now, what's important here is, Shravan, that this is a very important and a major breakthrough, a success we can call for the Indian diplomacy, for the Indian Defence Forces, how they, the army has been holding the ground at that place since last more than 1.5 years now, and the restructuring, rebalancing of the forces, the deployments, and an integrated deployment of the Indian Army, Air Force, and also the Indian Navy we've seen there in that whole area. So that built a pressure definitely on the Chinese PLA. And that agreed upon the disengagement. The disengagement has already taken place from Gogra Post. The next move would be to discuss disengagement from Hot Springs and also Depsang Plains. So altogether, if we talk about these two major friction points that are still left, there might be more than 5 to 6 small points that need to be de-escalated and disengaged. But now the success is that India has successfully persuaded and China has agreed, and both the troops have pulled themselves back. The structure comes back to that of April 2020.
Right.
The temporary structures have been dismantled. The equipment has been carried back. The vehicles have gone back along with the platoon strength of soldiers of PLA and also of India. So now the next move of the communication would be to discuss the further friction points that are left over.
Well, Shivani, I'll request you to stay on as we open this up with our guests. Just to put this into perspective, what does this essentially mean and how significant is it? And we couldn't have put up a better panel than what we have right now on our screens. People who are experts, if I may say. So let me just introduce Brigadier Sanal Kumar, who's been the ex-defense attaché. Colonel S. Didi, someone who's commanded, knows Ladakh very well. And of course, Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, who has been the corps commander, and he knows the area very well, knows what does this entire standoff essentially mean. So let me first begin by asking you, Brigadier Sanal Kumar, what do you make of today's development? Today's development in terms of the breakthrough that you are looking at, especially at Patrol Point 17A. There was a point in time I distinctly remember that people were very pessimistic, not very sure whether at all there is going to be some sort of a disengagement, at least in a place like Patrol Point 17A.
Can you hear me, Shravan? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
About if you remember, some time back when we started discussing this after the June 15th clash, I had actually said that there would be talks and there would be further talks and there would be talks about talks. The Chinese are fond of extending things. They actually put a premium on any concessions that any side makes. So I don't think we should be excited about one thing. We have these were recognized hot springs, Gogra were recognized in the very early days as low-hanging fruit, which could have been addressed much earlier. But now that this has happened, it's a positive thing. We should consider this as a positive move, but this is not it. We still have things to move ahead. We have to be cautious and we have to be concerned that other things have not been. In fact, hot springs could have been discussed right here, but they have separated it for obvious reasons that they want to carry on this process much longer. That's my personal view about it.
Colonel S. Didi, let me now bring you into this entire discussion and try and understand how challenging would it be for the Indian Army at this point in time? And we've had strategic affairs experts coming in and saying that, look here, we are talking about two mature nations coming in, they're talking together, but there are geopolitics that has essentially changed. We're looking at changing dynamics, not just as far as India-China is concerned, but also the changing dynamics of what's really happening in Afghanistan, what's really happening in Pakistan. Do you believe that that could also weigh in as far as what we are essentially looking at right now when it comes to the disengagement?
See, Shravan, I would like to put it in a manner that, like what Brigadier Sanal said, that we all expected that will be a long drawn process, this entire disengagement and then de-escalation in the complete and moving on to the April 2020 status quo. So I believe very strongly that the Chinese, if they have come in, and they're not going to go in a hurry, and the entire image of theirs being, why did they come without any goals being achieved or objectives being achieved? So they will not go back in a hurry, and even if they have to go back, they will go back in a very, very slow, steady process, away from the media glare, away, taking their own time. As you can see, at first they saw the North Pangangso area, the disengagement took place there. Now you have in 17 Alpha Gogra area. And then now the future talks is on the PP15, and then followed by finally, I think, in Dapsam. So it is part of the Chinese strategy to delay it as much as possible, so that for whatever problems or whatever objectives they had come in, once they go back, not too many questions are asked within China and also the international amongst the international audience also. And linked to it is your point regarding what is happening in the geopolitics. Definitely, it matters. I mean, it cannot happen that anything today we do, it is not in a standalone mode. All actions, wherever it happens, it matters. Like for example, as we all know that I think last week it was in South China Sea when the UK warships were going. The Chinese gave a very blatant threat that we will take out one to give a message to 100. So that was the kind of message which they were giving to the UK warships when it was going towards South China Sea. So what I'm trying to say is that definitely everything will play a part, but this particular disengagement process is absolutely as per what the Chinese wanted it to happen. They wanted to prolong it as much as possible, and we will now see further talks as Brigadier Sanil said for PP-15 and Dapsang.
General Rakesh Sharma, I want you to weigh in when it comes to what's the road ahead. We know it has been very challenging. We know that this has gone way beyond what one would have really expected. Yes, people did expect that the standoff will, perhaps stretch. But when we're talking about legacy issues at the line of actual control, because that's where the challenge lies. Do you think perhaps that's going to feature in the days to come in the talks that are going to take place? I'm not asking you to second guess, but just to to put this into perspective in terms of the road ahead.
Thank you, Shaban, for inviting me. The fact is that this process started post Galwan, that is on 17th, 18th of June, when the first buffer was created in Galwan itself. And if you follow the events that has happened from that 17th, 18th of June last year, and it continues across to what has happened in the course of this week, the PLA has forced across and brought across a buffer, a moratorium on patrolling into all the areas that they were involved in. So it started with Galwan. It happened with Dapsang also. So to say Dapsang is an quandary is that way not correct, because there is a buffer created both sides of bottleneck in an area of about 3 to 4 kilometers existing there. In Galwan is about 3 odd kilometers. In Pegongso North Bank, 8 odd kilometers. In Pegongso South Bank, it is again a substantial buffer and moratorium being increased. So the whole systemic is that there is a line of buffer zones or moratoriums and patrolling constructed or arrived at in the entire excite chain area. So it becomes a systemic being created. So I would say that treaty of 1996 becomes redundant now, which said when the patrols would come and they would clash with each other. Now it is no more a line of actual control. Willy-nilly from the areas of Dapsang and right up to Richingla, it has become a zone of actual control. The whole chemistry has changed. And I would not reckon hot springs as a very major issue. Gogra was a major issue. Gogra, the troops were face to face and they needed to move back, because at Hot Spring there is a river. There is the Chengchanmo River in the Soksalu area. There is a river in between. So there is a difference in Hot Springs and a difference in Gogra. And Hot Springs is not a significant issue. So the fact of the matter is that they have arrived at a kind of a zone throughout the excite chain, and I do not foresee further changes here. We have been, patrolling further in these areas of Gogra also, which now will become part of this moratorium of patrolling, which has been carried out. And I also reckon to say that one must state what is happening into the Tibetan Plateau and Xinjiang in the areas of airfields from Tasurgan right up to Lhasa, Gargunza, and what kind of infrastructure being built in the course of last 8 months is earth-shaking. All runways have been increased. There have been blast pens made. There have been storage capacities increased in each one of these airfields, in Hotan, in Kashgar, in Tasurgan. So, there is a systemic change happened. What Chinese are achieving is, I think, what was expected of them. And I add last word here. After April, one can give it to them that they were busy having the centenary celebrations of the CCP, which was in July. And they organized a very major series of events in the month of May to July. So one could say that they were not wanting to talk. But PLA is part of the party. PLA is not a distinct entity by itself. So PLA ought to be as busy in organizing the centenary as anything else. So August seems to be the right time to start discussing next issues. Shravan?
Brigadier Sanal Kumar, if I can just bring you in, because you perhaps would be the best person to bring in a dash of diplomacy, understanding what diplomacy essentially would entail. And in a situation like this, it's just not the core commander level talks that have taken place, the WMCCE talks that have taken place. Perhaps there could have been, we do not know, track 2 talks that have taken place, foreign ministers coming together. Do you think a whole gamut of all these put together has resulted in what we are looking at right now, rather than the bravado that some people would like to talk about, the Chinese dargah and all? Not getting into that, but you know, all that put together, government's role put together along with the military, essentially resulting in what we are seeing right now, what's happening on the ground?
Definitely, absolutely no doubts about it. The point here is that when this initial intrusion, clashes happened, there was also a little, one was put into perspective. There was a sense of nervousness within the Chinese system only, that the Chinese are known to take preemptive actions. If you remember, put your thinking cap and think about the Korean War. The Chinese People's Volunteers were surprised the Americans by taking preemptive action, and they took very decisive preemptive action. They took decisive preemptive action to forestall what could have been a possible security threat. So my take on this is that the last year's incursions, last year's things are also, it probably is a combination of many other things also with it, but it was more preemptive to ensure that, what an India that was sidling or was getting friendly with the Americans or friendly with anybody else doesn't do anything that will spoil the centenary of the party or do something like that. Now, once that happened, and once Galwan happened, they had to do things to pull back and not have another crisis on their hands. It has happened. It happened once, and we, all said and done, there were tactical victories that we did. We could have buckled in Galwan, we didn't. We did an operation on the Kailash range, which actually stunned them as well. So things actually were put into place in such a way that they realized that they had to cool down the situation lest things go out of their control. They are playing a very calibrated game. Typically the Chinese expect you or any other opposition to look at low-hanging fruit and early results. If you are content with playing their game at their pace, I'm sure we'll be able to do this much better. There is no hurry. If they can play a 75-yard game, we can also play a 75-yard game. We are also as old a civilization as them. Definitely, there has been all parts of the government, diplomacy, ministries, international fora that have all, and even international influences that have gone into setting conditions in correctly for all these core commander talks to get into some frame. But I think the most important point is that the Chinese realize that they could have a situation on their hands which probably will distract from what they have to do in other places. That is my take on it. Shravan?
Colonel Dini, just a quick word before I end this program also. Colonel Dini, just in terms of the tactical approaches that have essentially been made by the Indian Army, what we have seen, what even Brigadier Sanal Kumar was pointing out, the tactical effort has resulted in Panging. So do you think a belligerent China may actually need some sort of more tactical advantages on the ground to see a better breakthrough in the days to come?
Absolutely, Salan. There is no doubt that at tactical level, our action has been commensurate to whatever the Chinese have been doing. That's what I've always been telling, that the entire conflict, one of the prime reasons of this conflict is because today the Indian Army is present in this location, and like my battalion was we were there. So whenever the Chinese used to come, we were there to face them. And at the tactical level, what happens is that our troops are well trained. They can withstand all kinds of this vagaries of this weather and such like things. And that is when this message is sent across that, at the tactical level, you cannot just push in with your superior numbers or even technology or whatever. At tactical level, we can take care of a thing. And that's what General Sharma also mentioned, that, in the Kailash range and also in Galwan, we gave them a befitting reply. But what I'd like to say is that, what has happened so far, it has been a calibrated reaction from the Indian side as well. So whatever the Chinese have done, we have not gone overboard in showing our, a kind of belligerence or something. Whatever we did was a reaction, a calibrated reaction to counter the Chinese in their own game. And till now, I think we have played it successfully. And as the situation moves ahead, and as I see it, it is for further disengagement and de-escalation. And hopefully, I'm not very sure, but with the buffer zone being there, we may not, reach an April 2020 status quo ante. But still, we will be able to maintain a normalcy, peace and tranquility along the LAC. And for that, at tactical level, India has to pay back in the same coin as the Chinese does to us.
Right. Well, I would like to thank the three gentlemen who's joined us on this broadcast. We always run short of time, but thank you very much, gentlemen, for putting this into perspective. Brigadier Sanal Kumar, Colonel Dini, and Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma for putting all this into perspective and also telling us what perhaps we could see in the days to come.